Hey, welcome to my podcast where I discuss the origins of all sorts of things. I'm your host, Danny Payne, and this is On the Origin of Everything. Today I'm talking about dating apps. I'm old enough to have had some experience with various dating apps, and all of them have been a colossal waste of my time. But hey, I hear that other people have had better luck, or maybe I'm just remembering the commercials. They make it sound so good, don't they? Are you severely single or dissatisfied with your current relationship? Come to our site, tell us exactly what you're looking for, and we'll match you up with your soulmate. Easy. I realize that I'm sounding bitter, but I'm only drawing from past frustrations with trying to date online. I'm sure some of you can relate. This episode isn't about how effective or ineffective dating apps are. It's about how we got them. Dating apps are relatively new, being that we haven't had the internet for very long. But this type of service has been around a really long time. Let's get into it. To set this up right, I have to first explain that the concept of marrying for love is a pretty recent one. As late as the 1700s, marriages were primarily a business transaction. Love wasn't completely absent from the equation, but it was secondary. You see, for hundreds and hundreds of years, a woman was considered the property of her father, to be handed over to another man in marriage. Ever wonder why a father might walk his daughter down the aisle? To give her away? That's symbolic of the transfer of ownership. We don't necessarily think of it that way anymore, but that's where that comes from. And the tradition of a guy asking a girl's father for his permission or for his blessing to marry his daughter comes from those old customs. Typically, marriages were arranged by the parents, and the whole focus was to preserve or build wealth through strategic pairing of sons to daughters and daughters to sons. Marriage contracts outlined inheritance expectations, land rights, that sort of thing. Marrying within the same class was common. Even cousins would marry to keep property within the family. Inheritances were so central to many cultures that their laws reflected it. England and its American colonies were no exception. For example, if a man wished to marry a girl but didn't receive her father's permission, no dowry would be afforded to the newlyweds, and children born out of wedlock were not allowed by law to receive any inheritance. For many centuries, daughters were used as a means to maintain or increase financial or social status through strategic marriages, even by the means of marriage brokers. But things started to change throughout the 1700s. Up to that point, these societies were built on something called agnatic primogeniture, which is a fancy term to describe a succession system where the firstborn son inherits everything. Parents with several sons would even choose to hold off on marrying off the younger ones so that the eldest would have the best chance in the marriage market to land a good one, meaning a girl who brought wealth and/or social status to the table. The firstborn son stood to inherit his family's wealth, which gave him, and only him, leverage to attract a daughter from another wealthy family, creating an allegiance between families and consolidating wealth. By the late 1700s, inheritances had come to be distributed more equally among children, and this shift allowed for more freedom to marry whoever you wanted, being that the sons of a family, no matter the order they were born, or even daughters, stood to receive roughly the same inheritance. So, with the erosion of parental involvement in these matters, the real dating began. Marriage brokers or marriage agents continued to serve as matchmakers through the 1800s, serving mostly middle and upper class people seeking suitable matches. By suitable, of course, I mean someone within the same social status. Immigrants, having left their homes and their communities behind, and finding themselves relatively alone in a foreign place, also found matchmaking services useful. Some of these marriage brokers would simply match people up and collect their commission, but others would do way more than just setting up a blind date. They would gather pertinent information about their client, search within their own catalog of clients to find a suitable match, arrange introductions, facilitate continued correspondence, and if the couple agreed to marry, the marriage broker even helped with the marriage settlement. All the paperwork, like a mortgage broker does. Did they plan the wedding too? Geez. Another form of matchmaking was the personal ad, also known as Lonely Hearts columns. I have to imagine there are some listeners who have never heard of personal ads, so I'll explain. A person looking for a romantic partner could place a short message in a newspaper or a magazine explaining what they're looking for, Like one of those ISO in search of posts you see on social media, only instead of in search of used car with low miles, it was in search of some good young gentlewoman that has a fortune of £3,000 or thereabouts. That was one of the earliest personal ads from 1695 in England. That's why I did the accent. Can you imagine how much £3,000 would have been back then? Well, you don't have to imagine because I'm about to tell you. That was the equivalent of £300,000 in today's money. So this dude who was doing pretty well put out an ad to find a girl who was also doing pretty well. This is evidence of what I was talking about earlier. The wealthy sought to marry other wealthy people. And it's not like that doesn't still go on today. So, modern newspapers made their debut in 1690 on both sides of the pond, and that personal ad that I just read was about 5 years after that. So, the second we had the opportunity to post a personal note in the paper that we were looking for companionship, we were all over that. The first personal ad in America was in the Boston Evening Post in 1759. I absolutely have to read this to you. Quote, "To the ladies. Any young lady between the age of 18 and 23, of a middling stature, brown hair, regular features and a lively brisk eye, of good morals, and not tinctured with anything that may sully so distinguishable a form, possessed of 300 or 400 pounds, entirely her own disposal, and where there will be no necessity of going through the tiresome talk of addressing parents or guardians for their consent. Such a one, by leaving a line directed for A.W., his initials, at the British Coffee House in King Street, appointing where an interview may be had, will meet a person who flatters himself he shall not be thought disagreeable by any lady answering the above description. N.B. Profound secrecy will be observed. No trifling answers will be regarded." Okay, lots to unpack there. For instance, possessed of 300 or 400 pounds entirely her own disposal? We're talking about money here, folks. Lots of weird requests in this, like a lively brisk eye? The heck? But my favorite part was the brown hair, because I guess while we're dreaming, might as well get real specific. I also love the combination of must have 300,000 pounds in the bank and brown hair. Lastly, I had to go looking for what NB stood for. You know, where at the end it says, NB, profound secrecy will be observed. Well, I found out that it's Latin for nota bene, translated literally as good note, but meaning take special note of the following. So, take special note, profound secrecy will be observed, no trifling answers will be regarded. Alright, so that was a personal ad from 1759 in the section of a paper titled Matrimonial Ads. By the mid-1800s, it was common for most papers to include sections like this, and some publications were devoted wholly to marriage ads, like one called Matrimonial News. If you think about it, for this to be happening in America in the 1800s makes the most sense in the world. With people arriving from many parts of the world and not knowing anyone, and with people moving out west where men outnumbered women by a huge margin, putting out a notice in the paper that you were looking for a spouse was more than just practical, it was kinda necessary. It was tough finding compatible companionship in a rapidly expanding country, even harder for someone that recently landed on the shores of this place. Some minorities relied on matchmaking services during the 1800s and most of the 1900s, as finding ethnic, national, or religious compatibility was extraordinarily challenging for them. German settlers in the Midwest, Catholics among a large Protestant America, and Jewish communities needed help finding a suitable match. Sometimes the problem was gender imbalance, like I mentioned before with frontiersmen out west, but it was also a problem for Chinese laborers who were almost exclusively male. In the case of male-dominated situations, the solution was to import a bride from somewhere else, sometimes from overseas. Ever heard of a mail-order bride? I'll get into all that in part 2, but we still have a little ways to go before we get to dating apps. If I had to guess a date, like a year, in which the first computer was used for matching people up, I would venture to say probably 1985, which would be pretty early. In my mind, dating sites belong squarely in the 1990s, so I'm really stretching it by picking a decade earlier. Well, The actual year is 1959. A couple of students at Stanford were taking a computer class, which reminds me of when I was in middle school and one of my classes was just called computer. This Stanford computer class was called Theory and Operation of Computing Machines, a Math 139 level course. Some pretty advanced stuff. For their final project, they decided to create what they called the Marriage Planning Service, which matched up 49 boys with 49 girls based on input data collected through a questionnaire. It was done on an IBM 650 computer. So that was the first time a computer was used to match couples up. In 1963 in Iowa State University, a retired faculty member named Edwin Lewis, who had been a psychology professor and had also worked part-time in the student counseling services, came up with the idea to throw an IBM dance, or a computer dance. This wouldn't be a virtual dance by any means. It was a dance where a computer assigned which student would go with who, based on the questionnaire used at the Student Counseling Center. These questions generated data about physical features, interests, academic focus, and personality. One key compatibility requirement was height difference. The boy had to be at least 2 inches taller than the girl for them to match. It was the 1960s. But really, has that much changed since then? Well, hey, I happen to be 2 inches shorter than my wife, so I'm doing my part over here to challenge silly social norms. Anyway, Edwin Lewis's computer dance was really fun for everyone because each couple was dying to know why they got matched up with each other, making the whole scenario a great icebreaker. These two little projects, the one at Stanford and the one at Iowa State, used basically the same process that dating apps use today. The software, though more sophisticated today, is simply using the data that was inputted via questionnaires to find suitable matches. So that was 1963 that the computer dance took place at ISU. And just a year later, in England, the first commercially run computer matchmaking business launched. It was called the St. James Computer Dating Service, founded by Joan Ball, who had a background in marriage bureaus or matrimonial agencies. She was the first to commercially start matching clients up using a computer in 1964. That's so early. Then, in 1965, the first computer matchmaking service launched in the US by a few guys at Harvard who had been tired or bored, or probably frustrated, with the traditional ways of meeting girls. They called it Operation Match. And while Joan Ball's service in England was focused on marriage, Operation Match was focused on setting up dates. They charged $3 per questionnaire submission, and though it took some time to gain traction, through some fortuitous TV exposure and media coverage, they received upwards of 70,000 submissions. These early IBM computers that these pioneers were using were being fed punch cards to input the data, like those Scantrons we were using in the 80s and 90s. As you can imagine, it took a lot of time to transfer the mailed-in questionnaire answers to punch cards so that they could be processed by the computer. Sounds like a nightmare. But it was also exciting. People were generally intrigued about this new technology, and they weren't afraid to let a computer help them find a match. So it seems that for the most part, universities were the first places where computers were used this way. And a lot of that has to do with having access to computers and people who knew how to operate them. In the 70s, videotape dating made its debut. One of the earliest and most successful services was called Great Expectations, founded by a 26-year-old guy named Jeff Ullman in LA. He would bring clients into his studio to interview them on camera, then let them browse his library of cassette tapes of other recordings to find potential dates. The proposition was that videos represented people more accurately and more genuinely, compared to mere written descriptions. Doesn't this remind you of browsing profiles on dating apps? Video dating introduced that concept to the world. But it had some limitations. People had to physically walk into one of these studios to be interviewed and videotaped. These businesses were very localized, and the dating selection pool was limited to the video library in that facility. People could have recorded themselves at home and mailed the cassette to one of these services, except that hardly anyone had that type of technology at home yet. But what a great little chapter in the story of dating services. I follow an Instagram account called VHS Dates that only posts videos of these videotape dating services. It's fantastic. So Great Expectations, along with other videotape dating services like Together, were able to expand from just one video recording studio to dozens across the country, and they became very profitable all through the 80s. They too began using computers to help generate matches for their customers. These were the first intranet-based matchmaking systems. An intranet is a private computer network, whereas the internet is public. There was no internet yet. The largest dating service during the 1980s was Dateline. This is one I had actually heard of. It was a company founded in the UK by John Richard Patterson back in 1966, after having been inspired by those Harvard guys who created Operation Match. Dateline relied on mailed-in or phoned-in questionnaires, and their business was to mail back or phone back a list of match results. Dateline's slogan, "You too can find love." They were the big dogs in the industry in the 70s and 80s. They even bought out Joan Ball's St. James computer dating service. I love how interconnected all of these early players were. The 1980s was also the decade that gave us the Matchmaker Electronic Pen Pal network. If you had access to a computer with a dial-up modem, you could connect to a local network through a bulletin board system, or BBS, which is a text-based online forum. That was a lot of terminology in one sentence, but it's basically sending messages to people in your area with a computer through phone lines. The original purpose for this service was just general social connection, but it quickly turned romantic in response to how people were using it. Online chat rooms had existed in the 70s, but they became more widely used in the 80s. And there was also telephone chat lines, where you would call a number and leave a recorded message talking about yourself for other callers to hear. You would navigate a menu system to listen to other people's voice recordings, pushing 1 to skip to the next one, or 2 to reply. I immediately thought about what I would say if I called in. Let me try. Hi, I'm Danny. I'm really lonely. It's brutal out here. I'm 5'7", in case that's important for you to know. I'm looking for someone, anyone, who might share some of my interests. Lately, I've been obsessed with learning about ancient religions. Maybe we could talk about that together sometime. That sounds fun. I also like pizza and playing Zelda. Well, I guess that's it. Hope to hear from some of you out there. Bye. What do I do now?
We're sorry, the number you have dialed is not in service at this time.
Okay, well, this would probably be a good time to interject that there was a lot of stigma surrounding these dating services. And just now, I naturally went straight to making fun of it. There was a lot of shaming going on if someone found out you were placing personal ads in the paper, or doing videotape dating, or meeting people in chat rooms. The character Kip in Napoleon Dynamite comes to mind. If you were resorting to these measures, you were seen as desperate. Some might think you were a loser, like you couldn't cut it out in the real world, so you needed help. But that stigma began to lift through the 90s. Enter the World Wide Web. Not only did the internet give us access to everyone, everywhere, by this point most people had access to a computer with internet capability. These were optimal conditions for dating sites to thrive. Can you guess what the first dating site was? I don't think many people have heard of this site because it quickly merged with another site and was eventually bought out by Match.com. But the very first internet dating site was Kiss.com in 1994. It wasn't anything super sophisticated, basically online personal ads with photos, but it was the first internet-based dating site. Match.com launched a year later and grew to become a giant. Also in 1995, the first of many Jewish dating sites launched in South Africa called Yid.com. I say first of many because there were a bunch of Jewish dating sites right away, and I wondered what that was about. I found out that matchmaking services have been a part of the Jewish people for forever. There's even a story in Genesis where Abraham sends one of his servants to go find a suitable wife for his son Isaac. For most of their history, they have used professional matchmakers called shadchan. With the cultural pressure to marry within their community to preserve Jewish identity across centuries of persecution and displacement, professional matchmakers were a crucial component of their culture. So when the internet arrived, they were early adopters of this new matchmaking technology. Super interesting. So it's 1995, the year Craigslist came out, and we already have Match.com and Yeet.com. In 1997, Yahoo launched their own dating site called Yahoo Personals. In 1999, the first gay dating site launched in South Africa called Gaydar. I had never heard about this one. The gay community is another demographic that has benefited from matchmaking services, so it makes sense that a dating site devoted to them would show up early in the timeline. Match.com dominated the dating scene since its inception in 1995, and it wouldn't see any serious competition until the year 2000 when eHarmony came along. Their shtick was that they had a proprietary compatibility matching system that would curate a list of candidates for you instead of what Match.com had been doing, which was more of a traditional collection of profiles with photos to browse. eHarmony had you fill out an extensive questionnaire for its sophisticated matchmaking software, instead of just having you set up a profile and seeing if anyone talked to you. In 2001, Christian Mingle hit the scene, then Ashley Madison in 2002. That's really early. Ashley Madison is the site with the slogan, "Life is short, have an affair." I was placing them in the 2010s, probably because of the massive data breach it suffered in 2015. The dating site specifically for helping married people secretly cheat on their spouses got hacked, and all that sensitive information was leaked. I feel like that was the inevitability of all inevitabilities. For reference, MySpace came out in 2003, and Plenty of Fish launched in 2004. They were just another contender to Match.com and eHarmony. Then OkCupid a year later. For the next decade, a lot of dating sites popped up that were more exclusive, catering to a specific demographic, like Farmers Only. You don't have to be lonely at farmersonly.com. Remember that? There was one for seniors called Our Time. I remember their commercials had the best looking 65-year-olds I've ever seen in my life. Dating sites eventually evolved to dating apps around 2012 when Tinder came out with their revolutionary swipe-based matching. Swiping left or right was fun and everything, but what separated Tinder from the competition was its new matchmaking technique. You were not allowed to message anyone that hadn't liked you back. You would swipe right to like a profile, and if that person had already liked yours, or if they ever did in the future, you'd get a notification. Then, and only then, would you be able to correspond. Why was this such a significant change? It was a huge change for women who had been bombarded by messages on other sites from people they did not want anything to do with. Tinder fixed that. And Tinder feels like the perfect place to end part 1. I think it's great that we stopped stigmatizing online dating. We all just want love. Companionship is very important to us, made evident by our immediate use of any new media for the purpose of finding companionship. We've used personal ads, marriage brokers, IBM computers, submitted video recordings of ourselves, joined chat rooms, called telephone chat lines, and finally, we use the internet and mobile apps to connect to millions of people in hopes to make a connection, or to have a fun night, or to find the one person out there that changes everything for us. So that's it for part 1. And when I come back, I'll spoil this romantic vibe by talking about mail order brides. Don't go anywhere. This episode is brought to you by nothing. To help keep ads off this show, consider donating by clicking the Patreon link in the show notes, or by going to patreon.com/ontheoriginofeverything. Another way you can support the show is by giving it a 5-star rating and review, or by following it, or sharing it. Let's build a community of people that are curious and always learning. Now, back to the show. Part 2 is on mail order brides. If you don't already know, a mail order bride is a woman that has been transported from a foreign country by an agency to the country of the man who requested her for the purposes of marriage. I was shocked to learn that the first occurrence of this in America was in 1619, with the early colonists. The Virginia Company of London had been struggling to stabilize the Jamestown colony. Apart from facing starvation, disease, and conflict with natives, they also faced a gender imbalance. They realized that in order to establish a successful long-term colony, they needed families, not just a bunch of men. So the treasurer of the Virginia Company ordered the recruitment of 140 women, each around the age of 20, to be transported from England to the Jamestown settlement to be paired up with the men as their wives. Now, if you're squirming in your seat, I get it. I'm squirming too. It helped me feel a little better learning that these 140 young women were volunteers. They were not bought and sold, nor coerced. But who in their right mind would volunteer to leave their home, their family and friends, everything they've ever known, to travel across the Atlantic Ocean, to be assigned to some guy you'd never met, to marry him, and have kids with him? Like, what if he's ugly? There's a good chance he's gonna be ugly. The thing is, these women were incentivized by a few things. First, they were assured that they would be able to choose which colonist they would marry when they got there, and also have a say over the details of their marriage contract. They would also be awarded land rights, a pretty enticing offer at a time when women didn't own property. And lastly, this opportunity offered some women better prospects than they had at home. A stranger colonist husband in America plus some land is better than no husband and no land back home. Like I mentioned in part 1, marriages were a lot more about financial strategy than what we are used to seeing today. And these 140 volunteers likely felt that this was a smart financial opportunity for them. But I don't mean to diminish the difficulty of that decision. So the way this transaction worked was that the Virginia Company paid for the transport of these women, and the male colonists would pay the Virginia Company back in tobacco, which was the colony's currency. These imported wives came to be nicknamed tobacco wives. It's important to note that this instance was not commercially motivated, like mail-order bride businesses would later be. The Virginia Company was only trying to stabilize the Jamestown colony, not provide a profitable bride recruitment and delivery service. So by that definition, the Jamestown story would not fit the criteria of being a mail-order bride example. I think it counts because the nature of the agency is secondary, in my mind, to the outcome of the transaction. Women were recruited and transported to another country to be the wives of men. That's a mail-order bride. For the next 200 years, America would not see this practice, as folks paired up through the traditional ways of marrying within their communities. But during westward expansion in the 1800s, the West experienced another gender ratio imbalance as men outnumbered women by a long shot. Then the carnage of the Civil War caused a shortage of young men in certain parts of the country, and in these cases, people resorted to personal ads and using matchmaking services. But I want to make an important distinction, because a lot of articles wanted to label these cases as mail-order bride examples, but they weren't. Yes, there are documented stories depicting, for example, a man placing an ad looking for a wife, then receiving interest from a lady, and after a bit of correspondence through letters by mail, she agrees to relocate from Maine or wherever to the Midwest, let's say, and marries him on the spot. That's not what a mail-order bride is, though. The true mail-order bride scenario is an international transaction through an agency. To find the next occurrence of actual mail-order bride activity after Jamestown, we have to go to the late 1800s, to when the Immigration Act of 1882 established the federal immigration system. Before this, immigration was handled by individual states or individual ports. This Immigration Act placed federal agents at the borders and aimed to deny the entry of certain people, including convicts, lunatics, idiots, the term for mentally challenged people at the time, and anyone, quote, likely to become a public charge, meaning too poor and unlikely to be able to support themselves. Talk about too much room for interpretation on that one. In 1891, there was an amendment to this act that expanded that list and also allowed the deportation of anyone who entered illegally or under false pretenses. Immigration laws and their federal enforcement is what brought the mail-order bride practice back from a nearly 300-year hiatus. Unmarried women had a hard time convincing officials that they could support themselves without a husband, so having a male sponsor, often a husband, to vouch for them and provide for them upon entry gave them a better chance of being approved to enter the country. The best documented instance of this is something called picture brides. The term picture brides comes from a Japanese phrase, shasukin kekkon, meaning photo marriage. From 1907 to the 1920s, women living in Japan sent photographs of themselves by mail to prospective husbands in the United States. It was a way for them to successfully immigrate and a way for Japanese laborers to find compatible companionship. The Gentlemen's Agreement of 1907 restricted Japanese immigration, but it allowed a woman in Japan to join her husband in the United States, so that fueled the practice of picture brides. Other countries did this too, like Korea, Greece, Italy, and Armenia. I was walking around Denver last year with my buddy George, and we came upon a memorial for the 1.2 million people who were massacred in the Armenian genocide. That was the first time we had ever heard of it. And while doing this research, I realized that this tragic part of Armenian history led surviving women to offer themselves up as picture brides to escape their dire situation in hopes to find a better life in the United States. The next wave of mail-order bride activity came after World War II, during the Cold War period. During military occupations in Asian countries, servicemen had relationships with local women and sometimes married them and brought them back to the United States. They called them war brides. This phenomenon rekindled the mail-order bride thing as Asian American marriages became more common and more normalized. Some returned military men developed an attraction toward Asian women, and non-military men in America saw these happy interracial examples all around them and became curious themselves. The politically incorrect term, I believe, is yellow fever. So a demand developed on the American side for Asian brides, and on the Asian side, private agencies were eager and ready to fulfill the demand. They had no problems recruiting women, because as I've mentioned a few times in this episode, the female participants had something to gain from volunteering to be on the lists of eligible brides. Many of these women were living in developing nations and saw this as an opportunity to improve their situation. This was the period when the mail-order bride industry was on fire, and this practice hasn't gone away. The internet has only made this type of business easier to operate from both the supply side and the demand side. Before I conclude, I want to weigh in on this and sort some things out. When I repeatedly pointed out that women chose to participate, that they were volunteers, and had something to gain by offering themselves up as some random man's wife, I hope you didn't think I was implying that this was an entirely ethical transaction. There are some major problems with this industry, primarily that they are commodifying people, advertising women as objects. Not to mention the power dynamic issues between the man that is financing this arrangement and the foreigner who is to be financially reliant on her new husband in an unfamiliar country with limited access to information due to language and cultural barriers. So just because they gave their consent to participate, and just because they weren't coerced into becoming a mail-order bride, it doesn't make it fair or ethical. I felt it important to clear that up before I go. But before I do go, I want to make a quick announcement about future episodes. We are having so much fun making these episodes. We're using our natural talents and putting them to good use by making informative content for people that want to learn the origins of things. We wish we could do 2 or 3 episodes per week. However, being that we are just a 2-person operation, putting out even just 1 episode per week has been so hard. It takes approximately 40 hours to make one of these 20 to 25 minute episodes. From the preliminary research, to more in-depth research, to writing the script, which requires me to learn the information thoroughly enough to go from knowing almost nothing about it to teaching a class on it. That is the hardest part, I think. Then we gotta record the episode and edit it and put music to it, then mix it and bounce it and listen to it in the car. And if you're a recording artist, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a lot. So being that Jez and I also have full-time day jobs, our announcement is that we're going to release episodes bi-weekly instead of weekly. Partly so we don't collapse from exhaustion, but mostly because we don't want the quality of our product to suffer by trying to pump out half-baked material. I won't pretend that this change is going to make a big difference in any of your lives. After all, this is a free podcast. But speaking of free, if you find value in the things you're learning and you have the means, it would mean the world to us if you supported the show with a monthly donation of $5. Just $5. And as always, share the show. Someday when we have enough listeners and enough subscribers, we can grow our team and do weekly episodes or multiple episodes per week, offer bonus content, that sort of stuff. But in the meantime, we hope you keep listening and learning new things here with me. That's all for today. See you in a couple of weeks with a robust episode about the origin of Halloween. Research, music, and production was all done by Jezere Wilson. This podcast is listener-supported, owned and operated by Jez and myself, under the On the Origin of Everything LLC in the United States, all rights reserved. We can be reached via email at info@ontheoriginpod.com.